Welcome into a special edition of the FutureSox podcast. We are here today with a full draft breakdown. I'm fired up. My name is Elijah Evans, and I'm joined by Dylan Barnas, FutureSox contributor. And the two of us have been locked in on the MLB draft the past few days. We've been watching all the picks come in. We've been analyzing what the White Sox are up to. A really fascinating draft strategy this year, and we are just going to go and talk about every single pick made by the White Sox. The White Sox made 21 selections in this draft, 20 of which are expected to sign. And we are just going to go, our initial thoughts, and then we're going to give you pick-by-pick analysis of every single player, where they kind of fit in the organization, what their future could hold, everything you want to know about White Sox draft picks. We are here to provide for you. Dylan, how you doing, man?
I'm all right. It was a wild couple of days, but I'm really glad that this whole process is over and we're able to sort of slot them in and see where these guys end up, because there are a lot of guys where I think there's a real future for them.
100%. It's exciting. We're looking forward to it. It's fun. I mean, especially when we have been watching all season and we're really excited about the farm system already. And then you get a draft and you get this whole new influx of 20 guys to add to the system and be more excited about and just continue to really watch and enjoy the development within the White Sox organization. So we're pumped. This is going to be a lot of fun. We'll start here. If you just off the top of your head had to give this entire draft as a whole a general grade, what do you give them? We're starting with the big question off the bat.
Oh, man, I would tend to say like a B minus to a B, a solid B, because there were some picks that I didn't really like at the time, but sort of as the class went on, it made more sense. Like the Hagen Smith pick, I voiced my thoughts on him. He wasn't my favorite, but as we see the class in totality, it made sense. But there were some guys where I was like, all right, that's a really good pick at the pick you have. Like Shepherdson in the 11th, I think that's a great pick. We've heard Mike Shirley talk about him on the Zoom call after day 3. He sounded like he could have put him in the MLB bullpen tomorrow. Like there's a lot of guys where they might not have been there later. So like guys like Shepherdson and Pierce George, you had to take them then so that they didn't fall to like the 18th, 20th, and then you have to pay them however much over slot. But I would say a solid B minus to a B, just because I really like Caleb Bonemer. I think I had him like pre-draft as one of the top 5 prep talents in the class. I think that he's probably going to get paid like in the mid 20s slot value, which it sucks paying a high schooler that much in the second round. But with the talent that he is, I think that that's a very fair price for him, because he's got some real pop in that bat. Like it's big time power.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I think that's about right. I think I'm right there with you around a B. I think that was going to be my B, maybe even a B plus, because I do like a lot of these late round snags, and we're going to get into every pick. But I think you saw the Brian Bannister, Mike Shirley, just mindset really translate through this draft. And for those who aren't necessarily as familiar with these guys, like you saw this really, really dedicated approach to like, we're going to continue to stack this system with arms because we know we can develop them. Brian Bannister it clearly has this knack for just getting the most out of these high upside type guys. And you see, they take big swings at some arms that have some lively stuff and need refinement, right? It's not perfect arms. Like other than Hagen Smith, right? Like everybody else in the system is going to take some time. It's just, you've got a blend of really exciting arms and then super athletic, power upside type outfielders. I mean, there was 5 outfielders, arguably 6, depending on where some guys slide in eventually in their careers, that are going to be, impact athletes, right? And then you see, does that translate, right? Guys that had success at big programs. I mean, you look at throughout the entire draft, like an Archer, like a McCants, like, right? There's a lot of guys who had a lot of success throughout their college careers and are further along in that development process as hitters, right? And you obviously, Bonemer is the exception, right? A high school guy, super, uber talented, the upside swing, right? But you get a lot of these college guys that are almost already partially developed in a way where the organization doesn't have to do a lot of development with those guys. You just have to kind of let them grow. And I kind of like it, right? You're leaning into that philosophy with the White Sox right now, where it's like this team knows they can develop pitching and they're letting that be the focus while, now we're in a situation, and we might touch on this at the end of the episode, but like now we're in a situation where the White Sox have to find bats at the deadline. It was already a priority, and now it's like an absolute must, right? Like it's gone from a clear priority to like they don't have a choice now, and they didn't really have a choice already, to be honest. So I really don't think it changes all that much, but it does change the way you approach things when you know you're going to keep drafting and developing pitchers. You just got to find a way to add some more hitters, and they did. They added some hitters that could be something, and I like the swing they took at a lot of the hitters, honestly. So I'm fired up. I think it's a fun time. Let's start at the top of the draft. Hagen Smith, like you alluded to, right? Like we were surprised. I think all of us were surprised. I had a little bit of an indication before the draft that there was a possibility. So I was kind of preparing myself. I was like, man, is this really a possibility? I almost didn't believe a buddy of mine, and I was just like, oh, this seems a little weird. But Chris Getz and Mike Shirley seem really adamant that they took who they believe is the best player at that spot in the draft. What is your just outlook on Hagen Smith as a player, and then what that pick made sense within the rest of the draft?
I mean, Hagen Smith, like you said, he's probably one of the top 2 pitchers in the class, if not the best. I mean, he's got a starter frame. He's 6'3", 225. He's going to start at the next level as long as he stays healthy. That's the biggest risk for him, is staying healthy. He's 5 years removed from Tommy John surgery. So is there a risk that he has it again? Yes, but it's also kind of like, all right, he's had it already. We should gamble on him. He's not going to need it again. So it's sort of like will he have it again? Will he not have it again? We don't really know. But I mean, there's no denying the stats. Like his average fastball velocity was 95, but he can run it up there 100, 101, and it's a cross body arm action. So it's coming like almost like Noah Schultz, but it has like that carry to the top of the zone where you're getting whiffs instead of like the weak contact like Noah Schultz got. It had a 41.8 whiff rate, which is absurd. And that wasn't even his best pitch this year. An 84-mile-an-hour slider had a 56.4% whiff rate, which is just nuts.
That's insane.
And and he can manipulate it into like a sort of harder slider, essentially a cutter. And that's like in the upper 80s, even low 90s at times. So I think that is going to be the pitch that we're going to see really take off because it's Brian Bannister. He'll add a cutter, especially with a lefty. But there's also like a split change in the bag where it hasn't been that great at times, but when it's on, it's a real fourth offering. I think that if he can develop that cutter and that's splitter, I don't know if he'll have to like tinker with grips, but I think that a splitter from his arm slot would be really, really good. But I think the development of those 2 pitches is going to be the key for him because he has the strikeout stuff. He set an NCAA record in K per 9, which is just insane. I think the record was like a 22-year-old record. So he's a once in a generation type talent in terms of strikeouts. But I mean, he has control too. Like he does not walk many guys, and there's a real chance that he's up next year, if not 2026.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. He's going to fly through the system. This is a guy that you could put him in Birmingham right now, and he would probably be pretty okay there. It's unbelievable stuff, right? It's elite. It's college experience. He's pitched at the highest level of college baseball for multiple years now, right? Like there's so much to like there. And the thing is with him, like obviously you want him to be a starter, right? But like the very, very baseline for him is like an elite closer, probably, right? Like that's like if you look at his stuff and you look at his numbers, like that's like the worst case scenario. He'll be a starter, but like that is like. If everything goes wrong, he still could be like a top end like relief pitcher, right? So there's so much to like there with Hagen, and I think what is a little confusing to me more than anything is like I did think they'd go bat, obviously, and when I saw the Hagen pick come in, I was thinking it was going to be an underslot, but all indications are based on the rest of the draft that Hagen is not going to be a saving money pick right there. It sounds to me like the Cardinals were really interested in him at 7. I think the Royals were probably pretty interested at 6. Both those teams really wanted some pitching. Chase Burns surprisingly goes early, right? So you get the top pitcher off the board, or one of the 2 top pitchers off the board at number 2, which then puts you in a situation where I think Hagen Smith was really, really in demand from the 5 to 7 range, in which case I don't think the White Sox are really getting much savings on him. But at the same time, if their belief is that this is the most guaranteed major league impact player left on the board, fine by me, honestly, fine by me.
Exactly, because at a certain point you start to like value, all right, is this guy really worth $2 million more than the next guy? Like say they did go underslot for whoever, is that
Right.
guy for sure going to be a better big league player than the $2 million that you saved and you're
Yep.
able to drag a high schooler down the board? Like, it's just sort of like we just needed to look at the class in totality,
Yep.
and I think that once the picks came in, I think that I'm far happier than where I was on day one.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. I think that's a good point. I think it takes time to see what the draft develops into, right? And like Hagen was a fun start, and he's a great pitcher, but we also needed to see everything progress. And it's still a little weird that more than half the picks were pitchers, right? That still is a little bit like in my head, like, huh. But they're leaning into it. They know they can develop pitching, and they're just embracing that, and they're going to find a way to get hitters. And I really don't doubt at this point. I feel like Mike Shirley's earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to give him like the hey, like let's see what happens, because he has nailed some late round picks in the past 2 years and has continued to put together a pretty solid draft class altogether. Going to the second pick, which was the White Sox 43rd overall pick, Caleb Bonemer, Michigan high schooler. This guy was the two-time Michigan high school player of the year his last 2 years of college or high school. Powerful infielder, a lot to like there. Really tools out. The bat speed is excellent for a high schooler. This is a guy that should get the chance to play shortstop, and Mike Shirley indicated that in his conferences and said like they're going to try to keep him at shortstop and he's going to develop there. Ultimately could be a third baseman if he gets a little bit bigger and frames out. His arm is good enough to stick at third, right? So like he could easily slide to third, and that wouldn't be a problem. And honestly, right now with the White Sox, I'd have no problem with him sliding to third long term, but at the same time, like they're going to try to play him at short, see what happens. The team's been familiar with him for a long time. He was on the area codes team. Like the White Sox organization knows this guy. They know what he does. Arm strength, power. There's a lot of power to dream on. I think it looked like to me, the results were a little bit, up and down in terms of like power numbers. But when you see him on the field and you see him in these big moments and some of these, showcases and stuff, right? Like the power is clearly translates. And beyond that, right? Like good athlete. He's not a plus runner, but a solid runner from everything I've seen, and someone that is, he's another infielder to add to that staple, right? Of you've got a Colson, you've got a Jacob Gonzalez, Brooks Baldwin has looked great. I'm still not giving up on Brian Ramos, right? Like there's a staple of infielders now that are like the upper minors, and now you get a high school guy who can really be that long term, like left side of the infield project to work on with a lot to dream on for Bonemer. What were your initial thoughts on the Bonemer pick, and where are you at kind of with that pick overall?
I mean, like I said earlier, I had him as a top 5 rep talent coming into the draft. I think that he was probably top 3, like pre-draft cycle, like in the winter or whatever. But I think that he's sort of, I don't want to say he scuffled, but he didn't like take that next step like a lot of scouts hope for. But I mean, he's a very powerful left side of the infield talent. I think that I saw a Brady House comp for him, the third baseman for the Nationals, and I mean he's gotten Austin Riley comps in the past, so it's sort of like Austin Riley Jr. I guess. I don't know if I would necessarily throw that on him yet, but I mean if he pans out, I don't see any reason why he can't be, because the frame is there. He's 6'1", 195, so if he gets up to like 220, 230, and he's able to still keep that athleticism, and I don't see any reason why he can't be a 30 to 40 homer a year type of third baseman. But I do think that he sticks at short, and I think that he does want to stay at short. I think it's sort of like the Colson Montgomery thing where everybody's pushing him to third except for him. Yeah. So I think that he's gonna push himself to stick at short, and I think that ultimately he's probably going to stick at short. So it's just another middle infielder, and that's fine by me, because all the good organizations have just waves of middle infield prospects that they can either trade or they can plug in. So.
Right, 100%. That pick and also the situation with Hagen, right? Like that second pick, like it had to be a high school bat, right? Like I mean, I think we both were in alignment that especially that spot in the draft, like that's the time you spend big, you get the upside bat, and then you can go from there, right? But like considering they went Hagen, especially because they went pitcher first, like you had to get one of those, like a high school bat to really, really make a core piece of your future at that point in the draft, and they did so. I think following that, there's also another high school guy that we like a lot as well. But Bonemer was like, he was the right pick there. I think there was a few other guys that could have slid into that pick, but like you had to go with the upside hitter there. And I think you got a guy with a ton of upside. It's going to take some time, right? Like this guy's probably not going to play an affiliated game all season. You're going to see a similar route to the walkout type of thing with him, I think, where he probably is in the ACL this year. He gets he gets some complex games under his belt. He gets some, works at the facility, right? Spends most of next year in Kannapolis, and then we'll see from there, right? Like this is, it'll take time. It's not a 2025, 2026 type major leaguer. Like this is 2027. 27 or beyond, likely, right? But like, it's a fun piece to add of the Bonemer Walkout combo as the back to back, high upside high school guys that'll both play in, probably be kind of rising up one next to each other, sort of, is going to be super fun to watch. The next pick at the pick that was acquired from the Gregory Santos deal, and that trade, nothing against Gregory Santos, but that trade, it hasn't yielded much in the other two aspects, like Deloach, Prelander Baroa, not a ton there, but getting a draft pick in the top 70 of this draft, especially at the time where, there was a lot of high school guys going off the board at that point in the draft. The White Sox capitalized on Blake Larson. Tell me a little bit about where you're at with Blake Larson. IMG Academy, super, upside stuff lefty. Almost like you got two, potentially high-end lefties in the first 3 rounds of this draft, which is the Bannister way. It's what the White Sox are trying to do. So what do you see from Larson, and how do you kind of see him progressing throughout the system?
I mean, he's a very, very high upside lefty. It's a very projectable frame, 6'2", 180. The fastball is already a 60. Like, it's up to 96 already. It's got arm side life. It's essentially a sinker because he sort of throws from like a low 3/4 slot. It's not quite sidearm, but it's essentially sidearm. But the slider is like a really, really good pitch. I think I've seen a couple 60, 65 grades on it.
Yeah.
The changeup is there, but it's not like a true offering yet. But the big thing with Larson is the delivery. If you watch him, there's a lot of effort in it. It's a lot of moving parts. He's got long arms, long legs. It's sort of like the Noah Schultz effect, where it sort of looks awkward, but then he throws 96 right by you. So he'll need to smooth out his mechanics if he wants to stick as a starter, which I think he will. I think the organization has done well with mechanical tweaks and being able to hone in on command for a lot of these high upside projections starting pitchers.
Yeah.
But I mean, even if he doesn't add that command, I think he's at worst a nails left-handed relief pitcher out of the bullpen.
Yeah. What do you think they add for him? Because I've been trying to consider this, and we were talking about this a little bit. He obviously, the fastball slider combo is excellent. He already looks like a guy that's going to have 2 pitches that he really trusts. The changeup has shown some feel. I saw a few clips where the changeup looked good, but it doesn't seem like something he had to use much, right? When you're in high school and you have a 96-mile-an-hour fastball and a wipeout slider, like, you really don't need to use much other than that. Do you see the organization, like, I think there's a cutter in the future for him, but is there anything else you could see kind of being added to his repertoire to really, truly maximize those 2 elite offerings?
I don't know if I would necessarily say add. I think it would just be sort of like optimizing the fastball and turning it into like a true sinker, because you look at some of the clips, it's not necessarily like getting enough arm side run where you could call it a sinker. It's sort of like a tailing fastball. But I think if you sort of cut out that like ride to it and just lean into the arm side run, you're gonna watch him take off, because then you've got one pitch going left, one pitch going right, and one's 96, the other's 78, 79.
And then if you put a cutter variation, right, where you variate that slider and you turn it into, like, I mean, that's going to happen. I feel like almost every lefty in the system is going to end up throwing cutters at this point. We've seen what's happening with Crochet. We've seen what's happening with, I mean, it makes a lot of sense right now, and it's working in the system, right? So, like, if you pair a little bit more of a sinky fastball with that deep slider, and then you have kind of that sharp offering, that's the sharper version of the slider into more of a cutter, right? Like, it's nasty stuff. It's a ton of upside to dream on. It's the type of pick you make in the 3rd round, right? You get a competitive balance pick, right? Like 68th overall, and you have a pick 10 picks before your next pick where you can focus, more on the college market. Getting 2 high school guys in the 2nd and 3rd picks in the draft, like, it's the upside picks you swing if you're in the situation the White Sox are in, where they're a few years out from competing. You don't focus too much on the position, and you just get 2 guys that have a ton of potential. Larson, I want to real quick before we go on, and we'll move quicker through some of these later picks, but Bonemer and Larson, Bonemer's slot value $2.17 million, and Larson's $1.2 million. These guys both have to be over. Every indication from day 2 was that there was a lot of money saving in the back end of the second day of the draft. So around 6 through 10, pretty much all of those picks are going to come in under slot. Bonemer, you mentioned the $3 million number. It sounds crazy, but it's not really that crazy. At 800 over slot, I think at least the high 2s for Bonemer. Larson at 1.2 pick value. How high do you see that potentially going? Because I've been trying to debate what I see with that.
I could see it being like maybe 200,000 to 300,000 over slot.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the 1.3 to 1.5 range is probably where I'd guess. But I mean,
sounds about right.
We really have no clue.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm very curious to see when some of these signings come in because it's going to be fascinating to watch how the money got allocated because that's the one thing we really couldn't quite figure out. But we'll keep moving here. These three picks, we felt good after day one. Day two started and we felt good about it at the start, and day two was just a little confusing, and it all came into play later in the draft. But it's all about putting these pieces into a puzzle and making it all work. And that started on day two. It was the third round pick, Nick McLean, younger brother of Matt McLean on the Reds, switch hitting outfielder from Arizona State, started his career at UCLA. This is a guy that has dealt with some injuries for sure, had a back problem, had a hamate that missed some time early this season, really started to kind of find his groove at the very end of his collegiate career, and that's what ended up pushing him up the draft boards all the way to the third round to the White Sox. What was good to the end of the year, contact skills, switch hitting bat, outfielder, not a huge dude, right? Like smaller guy, but a lot of just, versatile tools, more power than you necessarily would think from a guy of his stature. He's going to be an outfielder. He's going to stay in the outfield. He's probably more of a corner outfielder than a center fielder, right? Like I think he's played some center, but to me it looks like he's like the perfect left field profile long term. Maybe this is the guy that in 2 years from now can replace Andrew Benintendi, who's he seems like a way better version of what Benintendi's done. Obviously, McLean has got some pop, but really just the contact skills, the solid defense, some good speed. He's healthy, and with him, like I think the thing that made him go third round is like there's more to see there. Like we haven't seen the best of Nick McLean yet because he's dealt with multiple injuries throughout college, and like it's the type of player where you look at him in the third round and you say like this guy's already been good and we like a lot of the skills there, but we can see more from him, so we're fine taking him a little bit earlier than he may have been projected to go in most places.
Exactly. And I think that the whole like injury risk, or not even injury risk, but the injury history of him, I think that you're able to say, all right, this isn't like his best baseball is ahead of him. Like once he gets fully healthy and once he gets consistent swings and gets in a rhythm, I think that we're going to see him be one of the better outfield prospects in the system. Granted, there aren't many, but I think that, like you said, if he's the guy that takes over for Andrew Benintendi in 2 years, whenever, I think that would be perfectly fine because he's essentially Benintendi but switch hitting. I mean, he's a gap to gap power guy. He will hit homers. But you're not gonna hit 450 foot bombs. Like his max exit velocity was 106.7. So it's not crazy pop, but it'll definitely play at the next level for sure.
Yeah, and he's got. I mean, there's more to it, right? Like I saw this thing about how he had 5 straight games with a homer once he got healthy in May at some point at ASU. Like there's stuff there. There's pop there for sure. It's not elite pop, but like this is the type of guy who I could see being like good contact, some decent power, good defense, solid speed. Like it's just a well-rounded player. I think that's the dream with him is like a guy that can give you a little bit of everything at the plate and on the field, right? And that's something that the White Sox don't have a ton of those super well-rounded guys. And I think the best case scenario for Nick McLean is he's a guy that can hit you, hit for an 750, 800 OPS with 10, 15 home runs, steal a few bags, play some good defense in the corner outfield, right? Like there's stuff to like there, and it's a well-rounded profile. And then they went with another outfielder. They backed it up 2 college experienced outfielders in a row. Casey Saucke goes in 107 overall, the 4th round to the White Sox. Virginia graduate. This is a guy with, a lot of power, good numbers, definitely some ups and downs for sure. His college career was bounced around a little bit. I think he had, a really good freshman season, struggled in his sophomore year, and then this past year kind of picked it up a little more and reboosted his draft stock a little. Good bat speed. It seems like a guy that is gonna run into some balls for sure. He definitely has some swing and miss concerns. It seems like he struggled on the Cape a little bit, one of a few of his summers. And then he's probably a right fielder. He has a good arm, not necessarily enough mobility to play center, it seems like. But generally speaking, a guy that's going to have that power upside, and we'll see what happens within the organization. But an outfielder with a lot of experience, some success under his belt, has played a lot of high level college ball, and we'll see where he winds up from there. What are your thoughts on Saucke?
I really like him. I think that he's probably going to be one of my, I don't want to say picks to click from the class, but I think that if everything goes well for him, I think that he's going to be a pick that we look back on in 2-3 years, and you're going to say, oh wow, we got him in the 4th. How did that happen? But it's going to be just optimizing, just getting the bat to the ball. That's going to be the thing for him, is like, because he's able to get the ball in the air and hit it hard, which is what you want out of an outfielder, especially a corner outfielder. But I actually don't know if he's going to play outfield. I thought I read somewhere that he played third.
He did play some third at one point, I think.
in like his freshman and sophomore years. I did see that he played third, so I don't know if they're gonna put him at third. I don't know if they're gonna put him in the outfield, but if he can be a utility guy where you're playing third for 3 games, outfield for 3 games, that's fine by me.
Yeah, it seems like he has the mobility to stick in the right. I'm fine. I'd like if they want to explore playing him at third a little bit. That's not something I would oppose to at all. But at the same time, I think it looks like he has the speed arm combination to be a really solid right fielder. I think that's where he's
Definitely.
been most comfortable. Only 22, which is kind of a good note there. Like he's a younger guy for his class. I think he's only going to turn 24 or 21 after the draft, right? So
Mhm.
definitely has some time to grow into his power, and has shown a lot at Virginia, and someone that I think is the numbers are up and down, but still some really impressive numbers for a college bat, and someone that, back-to-back outfielders, 2 guys that are college experienced, and then they followed up in the 5th with a guy in Sam Antonacci, who is a really fascinating profile. Antonacci's a guy that was a JUCO player, D2, like one of the best players in the country at that level, right? He played at Heartland Community College. He hit over 500. I'm just reading that right now. He hit over 500 with an on-base percentage of 618 in
Oh
junior
my
college.
God.
I mean, that's just silly stuff. Me and you both initially were like, oh, that's a Brooks Baldwin with less power if things
Exactly.
work well for him, right? Like it's ridiculous contact skills. He transfers to Coastal Carolina. He hits 367 this year with a 523 on base percentage this year. Once transferring over to D1, was the top number 1 ranked JUCO transfer in the country heading into this season. Was exceptional at Coastal. Like he keeps it up. He really has that advanced approach contact skills. You're not going to see a lot of power from him. He might grow into a little bit more power as he ages, but generally speaking, this is a lefty who can control the zone, make contact, and get on base with the best of them. And that's something that I think is a really, really cool pick to balance out the past few picks, right? Because it's a totally different profile than anybody else taken so far in the draft, which I really like taking that chance on him. And it's a guy who, like, there's more in there. Like, we'll see that he probably is more of a utility / second base guy than a shortstop. I think he played more third base in college in his last year at Coastal Carolina. But he's probably a second base profile, all things considered. But like, give me the guy who can get on base all the time and controls the zone and will really quickly, probably pretty quickly dominate the lower levels in the minors.
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing. His zone
Yeah.
contact, which is so basically zone contact, if you swing at a ball inside the strike zone, what are your chances of putting bat on ball? A 93% zone contact rating. So
For reference, like that's like a Stephen Kwan type of number right there.
yeah,
Like for
that's
people
yeah,
listening and people that know that how like that's obviously that'll be harder to translate at the higher levels, but that's the number that like Stephen Kwan and Luis Ariz are the only people like sniffing that type of number consistently, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he doesn't really chase too. Like he doesn't chase, doesn't whiff. But the one thing I will say about him is that it's borderline passive. Like he doesn't swing
Yeah.
much, but when he does, he makes contact. So I think that if we're able to sort of get him more aggressive while also not sacrificing any of those bat to ball skills, I
Yeah.
think that it's a great pick, and I think that he's the prototypical second baseman in this organization.
Yeah, 100%. You're exactly right. And it's never bad to have a utility type of piece, right? A few more numbers here on Antonacci, just because you mentioned the in zone contact, right? 10.4% whiff rate is the third lowest in the entire draft class. Against velocity over 93. This is a guy that's shout out to 643 charts. They had put up some really good draft content in the past few days that I was following in with some of their numbers. Against velo of 93 or higher, which is like a good reference for college guys, because you in college you are going to see, especially in a school like Coastal, right? You're going to see some pitchers that are sitting 90, and that's not really indicative of what you're going to face at the big league level. So at velocity 93 and over, 450 batting average with 14.6% whiff rate. It's silly stuff. Like the
Yeah.
contact bat to ball skill. I don't care where you started your career, at junior college, whatever. Like the dude knows how to hit. Like that's just straight up. Will he have enough impact will be the question, right? And where will he eventually settle in defensively? Probably second base. But like this guy can hit. He can hit a lot. Moving on to the second half of day 2. And this was kind of where the draft started to seem a little confusing. But at the same time, it really comes into perspective when you start to see the rest of it. In the 6th round, they go with Jackson Appel. who was a catcher, fifth-year senior from Texas A&M. This is a guy with, a ton of experience. Obviously, someone that it gives me a lot of Michael Turner vibes. Obviously, an earlier pick than Michael Turner, right? But like a guy that is big-time experience, has worked with some of the best pitchers in the country, is instantly going to be a really good defensive catcher in your system. But it's also probably a money-saving pick. He played at Penn for 4 years, transfers to Texas A&M for his fifth-year season, plays 1 season at Texas A&M. He's a good player, right? But at the same time, a fifth-year senior, 23 years old, it's probably going to save you a lot of money in the sixth that was used for some of those early guys, right?
Yeah, and one thing I will note about Appel is that he also played outfield too. I don't know if they're gonna use him as a catcher and outfielder going forward, but if you're sort of able to, I don't want to say hide his bat, because he is a good bat. Like he does make a lot of contact and he does hit the ball hard. Like he had a 108.4 max exit velocity. So if you're able to stash his bat at catcher and put somebody else with like a Wilfred Veras type in the outfield where he hits bombs, I mean, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't take him as like behind the plate, because he's not necessarily a bad defender.
Seems like a solid catcher,
yeah. He's both places. He's gotten good reviews in both positions.
Yeah, and he has pop too. Like this is not we're not trying to. I hope nobody takes it as like me like saying he's not a good player by saying he's an underslot, right? Like the pick was logical. He's still a good player though. That's not to say he's not a talented player who could really do stuff in the system. And he's a guy that's going to rise quick. Like you could probably if you look at the lower levels of the farm system, right? You could probably put him catching. And I mean, Calvin Harris last year's catcher draft pick is in Winston, but like Appel could go to Winston pretty instantly and be a high quality defensive catcher who will run into some homers and hit some balls, have some quality at bats, right? Like he's going to move quickly through the system, and like adding another catcher to an already deep catching system cannot hurt at all. And he's someone that is going to work well with pitchers. You're going to see, like, at the very least, he's a really good organizational depth catcher to have around and work with pitchers and develop some of those guys at the lower levels of the minors.
Exactly. And switch hitting catchers don't come often. And
exactly, for sure.
Once you have one, it's sort of like a luxury.
Yeah. The next 3 picks were all relievers, most likely at least all relievers, college relievers. I know you really like the first one of these 3, so I want you to tell me a little bit about 7th rounder Phil Fox. This is a guy Pittsburgh guy, a funky, short, right-handed pitcher, but a lot to like with Phil Fox, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, shout out my short kings out there. Phil Fox, 5'9", 183, but he's a super, like, data darling. Like his fastball is one of the flattest in the draft. It comes in at a super low vertical approach angle, and it's only 91 to 94, but he used it over 90% of the time, and it still had a 28.5% whiff rate, which is just absurd. If you're throwing a pitch 90% of the time and one out of every three swings is a whiff, that's you essentially are guaranteed at least one strike every at bat. Yeah. But his slider that he has too is not a bad pitch either. Like it still had a 57% whiff rate, and he only used it 10% of the time. Like if you're able to sort of get that slider more teeth and get it more break, I don't see why he can't be like a future closer type. I know that you comped him to Eric Adler, like when the pick was made, and I think that's a fantastic comparison.
Yeah, it's an advanced arm. Like he has experience. He's been around. He that fastball, like you said, is. I mean, Mike Shirley noted that as well. That it's one of the flattest fastballs in the draft, and it's a really impressive pitch. Like I was watching some tape of just literally watching him throw fastballs and like get outs and get whiffs on just like nothing but fastball counts. Mm-hmm. And it's like that's not really a common thing, and it's interesting to play with. And if he gets a slider, the slider is already pretty solid, but if he gets that slider up to 20-30% usage and it really develops as its own secondary offering, then you're talking about a fastball slider guy that could speed through the first lower levels of the system for sure. Funny little note here, the Chatham Anglers of the Cape Cod League. I believe the White Sox took 3 players that all played for the Chatham Anglers. I think maybe even 4 actually, if I'm remembering right, with Phil Fox being one of them. The White Sox were all over the Cape this year. It's interesting to see the entire like back half of this draft was super college summer ball type focused guys. A lot of guys that improved their stock literally this summer, where it's it's not the same approach from the old White Sox. That's the way I'll put it, right? Like they're going after guys that they like certain things. They're not going after guys that jump out at you as like, oh, we're gonna go for all big name guys from big schools and this and that and that. And there is some of those guys, right? But like there is a lot of guys being targeted in this draft that are recent developments that are kind of like that are just finding their groove and almost like it's like they're these picks that are being made with the intention of like there's more to tap into, right? Like that's what a lot of these picks felt like, including Phil Fox. The next draft pick, the 8th rounder, was another reliever with a lot of experience, right-hander Aaron Combs from Tennessee. You may know him, for some people listening, if you followed the College World Series. He was dominant, closed out the College World Series actually for the national champion Tennessee Volunteers. This is a guy that is another, a senior signing, right? So should definitely be a money-saving pick there at the 8th round, right? So it saves some money. Another guy that's a reliever and another guy that should climb pretty quickly through the system like Fox, yeah?
I actually don't know if he's a reliever going forward. I think that he's like he had some outings where he was going 4 or 5 innings, but he was going like the latter half of the game, so nobody really thought of him as a starter. Like there was one outing in I'm forgetting if it was the super regionals or just regionals where he went 4.1 innings pitched and it was like he allowed like 1 base runner. But Combs is like he spins the ball really well. It's a high spin fastball. It got a 37.7% whiff rate. And it's sort of similar to Fox, where it's a low launch pitch, but it doesn't have the same carry through the zone as Fox. It's sort of like a sinking fastball almost. But the real pitch here is the curveball. It had a 44.7% whiff rate in college or this past year, but I think that if you're able to stretch him out into a starter, I think that he has the pitch mix to be a starter, and I think that he might end up being a sort of like Mason Adams type. I don't want to compliment Mason Adams, but I think that he could end up being like that piggyback type to start, but then once you stretch him out and get him in that starting mindset, that he ends up being a starter. Again, not comping him to Mason Adams because Mason Adams is very good, and I don't want to put that burden on Combs right away.
That's fascinating you say that because I did note when they first drafted him, I was looking through and I was like, oh, this guy's thrown some long innings. Like it's not like he's only been a closer. He's had some really good closing success in Tennessee too, but he has had some games where he went well. And then like you just noted, so this is pretty crazy actually in terms of just like gutsiness. He threw 4 innings of relief in game 2 of the College World Series and then came in and had the 9th inning save in game 3. So this is a guy that threw 60 pitches in game 2 and then the next day came out and closed out game 3 to win the College World Series, right? Like this is a dude like that. If anything, like this is a guy that is like has pitched at the highest level, obviously closed out the College World Series, has a ton of experience and stuff to build on, right? So like that's a guy that like you want in your organization, right? Like it seems like everything I've seen about him is like top end makeup, really had some big moments. The curveball is great, like you mentioned. There's probably more to tap into there too. So like it's another guy that like even though he's a senior signing, right? Like there is something there's intrigue there and there's some excitement there for sure. Going into the 9th round, Jack Young from Iowa. This is one of the pitchers I have the least familiarity with, and a guy that didn't really throw much in college, so it's kind of hard to get a lot of. We don't have a ton of video on him. We don't have a ton of data on him even. This is another, senior signing from Iowa, a guy who is a 5th-year senior actually from Iowa. He started his career at Parkland College, made his way to Iowa, pitched in 8 games out of the bullpen in 2023. And then, this past season, right? Like it seems like another guy that was like a late riser almost, right? Where the White Sox ID'd him. They saw him this summer. Then they kind of decided this was a guy that they like enough and they can save some money on, but they like a lot of what they saw from him in this past few months, even though he doesn't have a long track record of success. Kind of a low velo guy, weird, funky arm slot type of thing. The slider looks like it's a plus pitch. So we'll see what happens with Jack Young. But did you see anything else that made you kind of that, is that right? Kind of that upside pick, right?
Yeah, I think that the key thing for him is the slider. I mean, the slider it looks like a plus
it's
pitch.
Pretty gross.
It's got 20 inches of sweep, and coming in from like a sidearm arm slot where it's essentially behind a righty, that's a very good pitch. It had a 42.1% whiff rate. But the fastball, I think that if he sort of changes it into a sinker more and leans sinker slider heavy, I think that he's an interesting guy because I don't want to say he's sort of destined for the bullpen, but because he has thrown multiple innings in his career. But I think that if you just tell him to go sinker slider only, I think he'll be a fantastic bullpen piece.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's definitely a reliever profile to me, but the arm slot with that slider is definitely interesting. So we'll see
Mhm.
kind of what else comes with it. I think they'll definitely try to bring some more pitches out of him, change his repertoire a little bit, but in general, like that's it fascinating for sure. At the very least, it's a funky arm slot slider, which is like that's a guy that can rise to the system pretty quickly as a relief pitcher. 10th round, Cole McConnell, outfielder from Louisiana Tech, another fifth-year senior signing, right? So there was definitely this trend in day two where we saw a lot of seniors, a lot of experienced college guys, but definitely minimal money spent from the 6th to 10th rounds and in the draft so far. So Cole McConnell, Louisiana Tech. What were some of the things you saw from the left-handed outfielder?
He's a great defender in center field.
Yeah,
That was my key takeaway. Just watching tape on him, he flies to the ball. He gets great jumps, and his routes are perfect. But at the plate too, like he does damage. Like his max exit velocity was 110, and he swings a ton. He doesn't always make contact, but when he does, it's pretty hard. So I think that if they're able to sort of cut down on the whiff rate and just improve that bat to ball skills, I think that he's a perfect fourth outfielder type, even backup center fielder.
yeah, for sure. That's kind of the vibe I get. It seems like the defense is elite, not just like good, but like top end defense
Right.
and stick and center field type defense as well. Some good speed, some good pop. I mean, this year, it's the USA Conference, which is not a high level conference, but 18 home runs and 17 doubles this season. In addition to a little bit of a high strikeout rate, 71 strikeouts across 60 games. So you want to see that come down to a degree. But on base percentage over 450, slugging percentage over 600. Like there's some things to like there from McConnell. In addition to being a really good athlete and an elite defender. So for him, it'll just be kind of figuring out how to tap into more offensive upside. But at the very least, you've got an elite defensive center fielder with some pop, with some athleticism for sure. Going into day three, you and I were kind of talking throughout this draft process, and going into day three, it was like, let's see some swings, right? Let's see some guys that are like, you see a lot more upside. With the last second half of day two, it was a lot of guys that were senior signings. Like I said, day three, you come in and you start off with a guy, and I was looking at the draft board and I was thinking about like the big name college guys. I was like, oh, who are some of these high end college guys? And clearly, I was thinking about it the wrong angle. Honestly, I had one of these guys on my radar of these next few picks, but generally speaking, I wasn't coming at this with the right angle, or at least the same angle as the White Sox. Right? They come out in round 11 and go for a guy that I had never heard of. I'll be honest, I'm not going to act like I'd heard of this guy, Blake Shepherdson, pitcher from University of San Francisco, and really fascinating arm, Dylan. This is a guy that Mike Shirley indicated multiple times, like, we really like this guy. He said he's seen him in person. He watched him throw like live this year and just thinks there's a lot to optimize there. And it's a fascinating arm, a 6'5" right-hander with some really, really nasty stuff, who's had a crazy good showing on the summer circuit this summer. And, the numbers are not good, right? Like you look at the numbers and you say, oh, this guy is pitching at a small school at University of San Francisco and still not looking, excellent. This summer in the MLB Draft League, whoo man, the sinker is disgusting. He has both kind of a sinker and fastball pairing with, he runs it up to 97, 98 with the fastball. I think he actually topped the fastball at 100, tops the sinker at 98, right? So there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of chase that he induces on the sinker, pairs it all with a slider that has a lot of RPMs, a ton of movement on it. Really, really interesting profile here for a guy that I think they ID'd as like, there's a lot to tap into with a guy like Shepherdson.
I could not agree more with everything you said and everything
Yeah.
that Mike Shirley said, because like you said, he's 6'5", he's 21 though. Like there's it's not like you're taking a senior reliever that's 24 and he's going to be 26, 27 by the time he makes the MLB. Shepherdson could probably make the MLB by the time he's 23. And if
Yeah.
you're throwing 98, 99, 100, like you're going to fly through the minor leagues. We've seen guys like that just absolutely dominate the lower levels. But I
Yeah.
mean, the slider is really good. Like I cannot emphasize how good that is, because it's getting 16 inches of sweep, but it's coming in from like
Nasty.
it's coming in from a super high arm slot where you wouldn't expect to see it's almost like a sweeper. So like
Yeah.
normally we see sliders like that. It's just like a gyro and it just drops. But if you're getting 16 inches of sweep from like, I'll have to check the exact numbers, but it was like a near 7 foot release height. So like, or not
Yeah.
seven, not 7 foot, 6 foot release, or over 6 foot release height. It's just it's a data monster, and I think that if we can develop some control for him, I think that he's going to be a bullpen piece for a very long time.
Yeah, it's gross stuff. It's really impressive stuff in general. This is a guy that I think it's a bullpen piece, right? Like I don't think they're going to try and stretch him as a starter. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like Shirley's pretty set on him and our 13th rounder, who we're going to talk about soon, being like impact relievers, which is a weird draft strategy. Like we don't see teams draft 6 relievers in a draft usually. That's definitely pretty uncommon. But at the same time, like there is a ton to tap into with Shepherdson. The stuff is just filthy. Going into the 12th round, they stuck with this kind of high. This is a similar. You see a lot of picks in this third day where it was this high performance at not necessarily the most tools out guys, but that's not even fair to say, honestly. There is some tools for sure, but there's a lot of guys coming up that are high level college performance, proven results, and more advanced stuff than their age may indicate, which gives you kind of a higher floor to then build off, at least on the hitting side of things. Nathan Archer goes in the 12th round, outfielder from Bowling Green. The MAC player of the year, is just power, defense, pretty just all around hitter. I think the approach still seems like it needs to come together a little bit for Archer, but a guy that at a smaller school like Bowling Green, like he dominated, he mashed. He's just been a really good productive hitter there. What else have you seen from Nathan Archer?
I mean, you sort of hit the nail on the head right there. It's power, it's speed. The speed is probably a 70, maybe 75. Like it's true quickness in the outfield, and he's going to stick in center field because of it. But the approach thing is definitely going to be the key for him. He does swing a lot, but it's hard contact when he makes contact. And I think that's sort of the theme that we're seeing with a lot of these outfielders taken is it's really high upside power, but the swing needs to just sort of just get the bat on the ball more. Like
Yeah.
that's that's something that we've seen a lot of like good I want to say good development teams, but it's something that a lot of the very analytical minded organizations do, like the Dodgers, the
Yeah.
Rays, the Orioles. They take those guys with great raw talent, and then they just teach them, all right, just hit the ball, like just going back to the basics.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There is stuff to develop with a lot of these hitters taken, but there's definitely stuff to dream on with him. In only 53 games this year, in the MAC, 18 home runs, 14 doubles, 64 RBIs. Really just a well-rounded hitter too. And Archer, it seems like there's 3 or maybe 4 guys in this draft that could play center field, which is kind of cool to see because obviously the White Sox, like, yeah, Luis Robert might be on the way out sooner than later. It might not be this deadline, but sooner than later, Luis Robert's probably on the way out, in addition to the rest of the outfield being pretty much up for grabs, right? Benintendi's not a long-term piece for the future. Yeah, he's signed under contract for a few more years, but he's not a long-term guy you're planning on. Right field has been a revolving door for who knows how long. Maybe Colas comes through, maybe Dominic Fletcher comes through. There's other guys coming up, whatever. It's nice to have 4 or 5 college outfielders that are going to move fairly quickly through the system, and if any of them hit, then right? Like if you look at this outfield core, right? Like you got guys in McLean, in Saucke, in Cole McConnell, in Nathan Archer, and then 2 more outfielders. Well, 1 more, maybe 2 more later in the draft that we're going to talk about. If any of those guys are big league pieces in the outfield, like that's a pretty good draft, right?
Exactly, and that's sort of the thing that like we as a fan base need to like just tone our expectations down, because all 20 of these guys are not going to be big leaguers. If 5 of them are, then it's a fantastic draft. Like
Exactly.
that's sort of the thing that we just need to relax. Like none of these guys are going to be, well, they could be. For I would be awesome, I would be elated if these guys are Hall of Famers, but like
Of
they're
course.
not, going to be. There's a sort of, I don't want to say like lack of like depth in the organization, because like Jared Walsh, he's not a part of the future. Like
No,
I
of
actually
course.
think he just got released today.
He might have. I don't think
Unfortunately,
he's. I'm
yeah,
not sure he's still on the roster, but yeah.
yeah. But like we don't need pieces like him. If we can have like a younger guy playing first base or any position really, like that's perfectly fine by me. And if he hits,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, going on to the 13th round, this is very similar to the 11th round with Shepherdson. Pierce George out of Alabama. The guy is topped 103, Dylan. This is an arm, right? Like, this is a power arm. Has really struggled with command throughout his entire college career, but has been excellent on the Cape this summer. Is probably someone that you could see, like, if he's, he was a draft eligible sophomore too. Like, so this is a young dude who definitely has some time to grow. He's, just turned 21 recently, but still in his sophomore year technically. Hasn't thrown a lot of college innings, a lot of arm, I'm trying to think of the term here, but a lot of wear and tear to go, right? Like, he doesn't have a lot of wear on his arm. Like, there's a lot of innings that to be found in there. And a guy that, like, if the command comes together, the fastball is elite. The slider has a ton of movement on it. This is a guy that, like, the dream situation, if the Bannister and Co. pitching lab can get his command going the right direction, like, this guy could be an impact reliever in like less than 2 years. Is that crazy? I don't think that's crazy. Like, the stuff is off the charts.
I think that both George and Shepherdson, the way that Mike Shirley was talking about him,
Yeah.
they could slot in the big league bullpen tomorrow, and he would be perfectly fine with it.
Let him try.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it can't be worse than what we have.
Yeah.
But Pierce George is just an absolute monster. Like you said, there's a lot of bullets left in the arm. Like, especially with the arm that he is, the type of arm that he is, throwing hard, it's a strain on your arm, and you want to have as many bullets left in your arm as possible. And only 11 innings pitched in 2024. There's a lot left, but the slider is just absurd too. Like, everybody's looking at the fastball like, oh wow, 103. The slider had a 76.9% whiff rate in 2024. Like, that's just it's literally unhittable. Like, and it's a high 80s slider that it's still getting slider movement. Like, it's not like a cutter where it's only getting like 2-3 inches of horizontal movement. It's moving like 12 inches.
Yeah. No, it's gross. It's really just nasty stuff. This is a guy that, like, if things, like, give it time. I'm not saying the command's going to come together tomorrow, but, like, in terms of like impact relievers, I think George is like the true closer upside of this draft if the command comes together. Another Chatham angler worth mentioning there. I'm looking at it now. I think there's 4 from this draft. So clearly the White Sox were hanging out at the Cape Cod League and watching the Chatham anglers this summer because it's really funny to see that, a bunch of guys from the same summer league team are now all, and these guys know each other too. So that's like a little cool tidbit there, is that you're going to have like a bunch of this draft class already that has played with other guys that are in the organization already or played together in summer ball, or like there's a lot of intertwined connections, finally, like, which is kind of ironic within this draft. And Pierce George is a guy that is exceptionally talented. The next 2 picks were both, college starting pitchers, both with a lot of experience, both guys that I think, are going to be starters. I think they kind of fit that. The next pick, at least, the 14th round, Justin Sinibaldi, fits that kind of Lucas Gordon mold to a degree of somebody that has pitched in college, been experienced, might not have the most upside, but at the same time, like, as a senior signing for a 6'5" left-hander, there's probably a little more to even tap into here with Sinibaldi.
Yeah, I think you sort of summed up what I was about to say too. Like, he's a lefty who's probably going to stick as a starting pitcher just because he has a track record of being a high command lefty who has a starter's pitch mix. It's sinker, slider, changeup, and doesn't walk many. Like, it's soft contact when contact is made. But I think that it's sort of like a Lucas Gordon is a good comp. I think that it's like a short arm movement. I don't want to say like he throws the ball from his ear almost, but like it's sort of like he's like pushing the ball. And I think it's sort of just that deception helps his stuff play up a bit more. And like, his stuff isn't bad too. Like, he has good movement on all 3 of his pitches.
Yeah. Yeah, and he has a ton of innings under his belt. Like, this is a guy that has experience. He's been there. He's done that. He's 4 years of college with, being pretty healthy, pitching at least 30 innings every single season. Was made a bunch of was a half starter, half reliever his first 3 seasons. This past season becomes like the full-time, every weekend starter for the Rutgers, right? 13 starts this year. Threw a complete game shutout at one point, 83 innings under his belt, only 22 walks across 83 innings, right? Like, it's command, it's consistent. There's probably more to even add there in terms of like some pitch maximization, right? Like, the organization will probably tap into some of his movement profiles and try to kind of build a little bit onto it. But like, he's a starter. He's a lefty. It's a guy that, like, at this point in the draft, in the 14th round, you're getting a guy who's like has a proven track record of success as a starting pitcher at the high level of college baseball, which is like, I'm okay with that because you've taken a lot of relievers to this point with a lot of stuff to maximize, right? Like, getting a few experienced starters later in the draft is exactly the way that I would approach it. And I think that's what they did in these last 7 rounds was get a handful of guys who have proven they can start, they can eat innings, they can churn, and all of them probably have a little more to tap into to. One guy that I think I will put my hat out there a little bit. You mentioned this earlier with a guy like some of the guys earlier in the draft, right? Mason Moore is one of my guys that I think is could be a lot more than what the 5th round draft pick indicates. This is a guy who was one of the best pitchers in the entire SEC in terms of the numbers in his sophomore season, and then last year struggled a little bit, but still kind of so. Let me backtrack a little bit. 2023. Mason Moore had a 1.8 ERA across 55 innings in 22 games. So he was mostly a reliever. I think he made a few spot starts, but mostly a reliever. But the strikeout stuff was nasty. He was really looking like he came into this past season listed as a preseason All-American third team. He was listed as a top 60 starting pitcher in for D1 baseball. He came into this year looking like he could be, much higher than a 15th round pick. Becomes a full-time starter in his junior season. Definitely took a step back this year, but at the same time, there's a lot to like with his stuff, and there's a lot to like with his experience of pitching at a high level, being able to really command games. And then even with a rough season, you see him come into the College World Series and put up some really, really good numbers in the College World Series just about a month ago, right? So talk about draft stock being up and down. This guy's seen his stock swing a lot, but you see him finish his season and finish his college career in the College World Series against some high level competition, looking like a legit starting pitcher. A lot of innings under his belt, someone that just like Sinibaldi, he should be starting. He'll be able to start. He'll be able to churn innings for the White Sox. And I think there's more to be found there. And I think in terms of value, considering what he did in 2023, getting him in the 15th round is incredibly good value in my mind.
Yeah, I think that we were talking about it as the pick came in. We were like, this is a real buy low guy.
Yeah.
And if you're able to get him back to that 23 talent or 23 performance, while also staking him as a starter, I think that it's a fantastic pick because it's a 4-pitch mix, fastball, sinker, slider, change, but the changeup is a really good pitch. I think it had a 40 something % whiff rate. I don't have it written down. I usually have it, but I don't have it.
No, you're good.
But I mean, it's definitely a starter's frame going forward. 6'4", 215, and it's everything that you want in a starter. And you mentioned the high leverage performances. I think that I saw one post by a Kentucky fan page or whatever. In College World Series games, his ERA was under 1 in his entire career, but then outside of it, it was over 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
Just he steps up when the lights are bright, and that's all you can ask for with a starting pitcher.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot to like with Mason Moore. I think like I said, I think there's more to be found there. I think it's going to take some time, but I think there's some things to maximize there. And I think he, has shown to be able to perform, like you said, in those big moments and could be even better, right? This one of these games from, what was this, in June? In regionals, right, against Indiana State, a 6-inning, 4-hit shutout for Moore in that game, right? There was multiple performances along regionals and in the College World Series where it was oh, this guy can be a real starter. He really knows how to work the zone. He's confident in a lot of pitches. So we'll see what happens for Moore, but I really like that pick. 16th round, they switch back to the hitting side of things after 3 straight pitchers and go with outfielder TJ McCants from Alabama. Started his career at Ole Miss. It's super funny to see Tim Elko and Jacob Gonzalez interacting on social media. This is a guy that played with those guys. They won a national championship together. Really cool little, just Ole Miss bloodlines there, but finished his career at Alabama this past season. Left-handed outfielder, was a great center fielder, but Mike Shirley indicated that TJ McCants is going to be kind of that super utility type guy. They really like his athleticism and his arm, and he's the type of guy that they want to try and really play all over the field. What do you think about that kind of switch from McCants, even though he was a really good outfielder, and just what he brings to the table as a senior experienced guy, college hitter?
I mean, he was recruited to Ole Miss as an infielder, but they switched him to the outfield after they had some guys come in, Jacob Gonzalez, and I mean he was awesome. I mean, he started every single game for Alabama this year in center field, and he was fantastic. I think he sort of fits that mold of the Archer and McConnell type, where he does damage when he makes contact, but he swings a lot and needs to cut down on the whiffs. But I think that if he's that sort of super utility guy, I think you're able to sort of hide some of the bat issues that he may have, because it's great defense. And if you can get that great defense in all 3 outfield spots while also having great defense on the infield, that's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Already 23 is one thing to note with McCann. So a guy that like hopefully will rise to the system quickly. But if he's like at worst case scenario, right, he's like a super utility depth organizational guy, and like that's not a bad thing to have ever. And a guy that can work counts, and hopefully the approach develops a little bit like you said. But like there's some power to dream on. 15 home runs this past year, 14 stolen bases. Like there's a lot of well-rounded athlete aspects to his game. And I think if you can put a guy all over the field, like we saw that with Brooks Baldwin last year, and obviously Baldwin has kind of played mostly shortstop and second base this year. But if you can get a guy that can just literally play all over the field and give you some power, give you some speed, like that's a great player to have and continue to work on. After this pick, I'm going to just give the floor to you because you were pretty geeked up about the 17th rounder yesterday. And I know a lot of people are, to be honest. And I was not familiar with him. And then once you start, you look up 2-3 videos of the White Sox 7th round pick and you're like, oh, this is a guy in the 17th round. Lyle Miller-Green, listed as a two-way player, most likely a hitter. Mike Shirley did indicate that Bannister likes some of the underlying pitch metrics for Lyle Miller-Green. Austin Peavy, guy, 23 years old, so definitely an older guy, a fifth-year senior, I believe, 6'5", 240. Some of the most ridiculous power you will ever see. Lay it out for me, Dylan.
I mean, you sort of said it right there. It's 116.5 max exit velocity. That's just it's absurd. Like Mike Shirley said, he probably has the second best power in the class after Jack Caglione, and that's not a stretch to say at all. It's a 111.3 90th percentile exit velocity. So 90th percentile is basically how hard you hit the ball like consistently. It sort of takes the average of your top 10% of all batted balls and says like, all right, so you're hitting the ball hard. How hard are you hitting the ball like over an extended period of times? Like the 116.5 is a one-time thing, but 111.3 is that's absurd.
So 116.5, Dylan. I want you to guess how many major league players have hit a higher max exit velo than that this year, because it's not a short list, but like it's not that long of a list. And I'm not saying like obviously Lyle Miller-Green will have a long way to go. He'll need to find some, a little bit. His approach is pretty good actually. He's a patient hitter, but like how many guys do you think have topped 116.5 in the major leagues this year?
Oh my God. All right, so Ohtani, Judge, I don't know if Acuna did. He probably didn't.
Actually, believe it or not, Judge has not this year.
No way.
Isn't that
really?
crazy? Judge's 2024 max exit velo is 116.1.
Oh my God. Soto. I don't know if Soto did. I don't think he did.
Soto has not either.
I'm gonna say 12.
I think it's 11. You were pretty close, so that's not bad. Yeah. You were pretty spot on, but it's O'Neal Cruz obviously at the top with 121.5. That was stupid, but nuts. O'Neal Cruz, Giancarlo Stanton, Shohei Ohtani, Vladimir Guerrero, William Contreras, Yandy Diaz, Ketel Marte, which is kind of a surprise. 117 from Ketel Marte is pretty crazy. Bobby Witt Jr., Yordan Alvarez, Fernando Tatis, and Jose Ramirez are the only people with higher exit velocities than Lyle Miller-Green's max exit velo in college. So obviously, like that's context, right? Like it's in college, like he's gonna it's way harder against big league pitching, of course. But that is still ridiculous. And this guy, what was that homer that you posted? It was like 480 something.
Yeah,
on a homer.
485. That was the 116.5.
Just silly stuff.
It was on a good pitch too. Like it was a changeup, like well located down and away too, and he just gets his barrel out to it and sends it 485 feet dead center. Yeah. Like the center fielder just turns and watches it. Like it's right. It's a super funny clip to watch because the pitcher points. I don't know if he like points up at it, but he like looks up like there's a chance for the center fielder to catch it. Like it's very funny.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. Another Chatham angler, I will note, for collegiate seasons in the Cape, multiple years he played there. Like another really, really interesting guy with more to tap into, right? Like there is definitely some risk there. Like I'm not saying he's going to be a guaranteed star, and it's going to take some time to kind of figure things out as he ages. But like if you're going to take a fifth-year senior at this point in the draft, if you can get a guy with that type of pop, like this guy could easily be Tim Elko next year and just boulder through the minor league system and just dominate. I mean, he could be in he could probably be in Double-A next year, right? Like if he continues to like the lower levels, like he should probably just mash and hit a ton of homers and like dominate through that part of the system. So a lot to like there with Lyle Miller-Green in the 17th round. 3 more picks to go. The last one is an interesting one, but we're gonna start with 2 back-to-back left-handed pitchers. Both guys that have been college pitchers, maybe profile more as relievers long term. In the 18th round, they went Liam Paddock, left-hander from Gonzaga, 6'4" left-hander, junior class, not even a senior signing, right? So a little bit of a lot of these late round senior guys here, but then Liam Paddock is still fairly young. He's still only 20 right now at the time of the draft. Turns 21 next week. But Paddock is someone who, there's some things to like there with Paddock. I think there's some intrigue there. I think it's someone who has probably not quite maximized his game yet. And I think another guy that like you can look at as a left-hander and see the profile and think, he could probably be a pretty impact left-hander reliever. He's been a starter at Gonzaga, but I could see him, another Chatham Angler. He had a good summer this year. The numbers aren't great for Paddock this past season at Gonzaga, but generally speaking, like it was more of a command issue than anything else. I think the stuff was impressive. 77 strikeouts across 65 innings, 56 walks is a lot, especially for a starter, 17 hit by pitches, right? So like the command is not quite there, but there's some interesting stuff with his pitch mix. I was talking to a buddy of mine who works with the Gonzaga baseball team and was saying, there's a lot to like with this stuff. It just is going to take some time to come together for Paddock, and I think they'll probably start him as a starter, but I do see his profile a little bit more as a reliever. Are you thinking the same?
Yeah, I was gonna say like it's probably they're gonna give him a chance to start, definitely, just because of like his pitch mix is a starter mix right now. It's fastball, changeup, slider, curveball. And what was interesting to me is that this year he was like mainly fastball, changeup. Like he threw only like a handful. I don't want to say a handful, but like it was less than 200 of slider, curveball. But when they were thrown, they got whiffs, which is pretty interesting. So I don't know if they saw that and were like, oh, okay, we'll scoop them up here in the second to last round or third to last round. But the changeup isn't bad too. Like it's definitely a control issue because the stuff is definitely there. So if they can stick him as a starter and he does well, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And then Nick Pinto, 19th rounder. This is a guy that I actually saw pitch in person this year. Being at Santa Barbara right now, I saw him. This is a UC Irvine graduate, grad student. I saw him pitch against Santa Barbara, and he always gave Santa Barbara trouble. In my time being a schooler, I think I've actually seen him pitch 2 or 3 times in the past few years. This is a guy that just is a funky left-hander, and nothing. You see him on the mound, like barely 6 foot, maybe 180, listed at 6 foot, 185 left-hander. A really funky release, kind of interesting type of pitch mix. But someone that like he just gets outs like this, like honestly, like that's the way when I watched him pitch, like he just finds a way to get outs. The curveball is really, really good. He throws a curveball a lot and it gets a lot of whiffs. Gonna need to find a little bit more depth to his pitch arsenal. I think right now, like he profiles to me as more of like a curveball oriented, like lefty reliever guy. Like you could put him as like a long relief, mid relief left-hander, and he could be really effective in that role. They're gonna still try him as a starter. He has a ton of innings under his belt, a lot of experience starting. But Pinto is someone that like he's a very prototypical like Big West pitcher. Big West is the conference that UC Irvine plays in, UC Santa Barbara plays in. Not a guy you see and are like, oh, that's a lot of stuff and that's overwhelming, but a guy that can get outs and does have a really good breaking ball as well.
Yeah, I mean he's UC Irvine's all-time strikeout leader, which I thought that was really cool to get him in the second to last round. I think it was like 330 something.
Yeah.
But I mean he's been there for 4 or 5 years now, so he's got definitely the experience to stick as a starter. And if he ends up going to the bullpen, then like you said, curveball oriented left-handed reliever, and the curveball is good too. Like it does get whiffs when it's thrown because it's just a big loopy curveball that's coming in from a sort of funky arm slot where you don't really expect a giant curveball to sort of like lollipop up out of the arm because it's coming in almost like from sidearm. But it's a good pitch, and I think that if he does end up moving to the bullpen, he'll have success with it.
Yeah, 100%. The numbers are really just like you see a guy that just has a ton of experience, and like he's already 24 at this point, but at the same time, like that's it in the 19th round, like a guy that has pitched, like he's been in their starting rotation for 4 years now at Irvine after being more of he didn't pitch much his first year, and then his second through fifth years he pitched pretty much, was a starter the entire season. Had a little bit of a rough year last year, but in the last 4 years, 86 and 2/3 innings, 86 and 1/3 innings, 66 and a third, and then 94 and a third this year. So like the guy has pitched 65 plus innings, 4 straight seasons as a starting pitcher in a pretty good college program, right? Had under a 4 ERA in 3 of those 4 seasons aside from last year, right? So like tons of strikeouts. Like he just has been a successful college pitcher, and we'll see how it translates to the next level. But there's definitely, in my opinion, a lot to like there with Pinto, even if it's a lefty curveball or a good reliever. Finishing off the draft, fascinating story and a little bit of a bummer we're talking now because we've already kind of heard the news on him. And we both knew this when it came out. But after kind of waiting all of day 2 and day 3, like, is there going to be a big high school guy? The 20th round, the last pick in the draft, you see Miles Bailey pop up. Miles Bailey is one of the most exciting prep hitters in the entire class, a guy with like elite power potential. This is a high school guy who's, huge 6'4" left-hander, probably a first baseman. Maybe he's an athletic guy. He could end up as an outfielder eventually, but 6'4" left-handed hitter with a ridiculous amount of bat speed. Just a guy that is super, super high potential. Unfortunately, the reality for Miles Bailey is this was more of a contingency plan pick. I knew it when it happened. I kind of, based on what we'd heard, it sounded like the White Sox didn't have a lot of excess money by the end of the draft. They take Miles Bailey in the 20th round basically as an insurance policy that if they can't come to terms on a contract with some of those early guys or some of the guys like Shepardson, Pierce in the later rounds that are going to be above slot, then you could try and maybe pull Miles Bailey away from his Florida State commitment. But given the money they had, Miles Bailey already announced yesterday that he will be going to Florida State for college. So the White Sox will not be signing 20th rounder Miles Bailey. But just give me your brief thoughts on Bailey. And taking a guy in the 20th round, like, yeah, it means nothing because you're not getting him. At the same time, though, Dylan, like, you're building a relationship with this guy. You're saying, hey, like, we like you a lot. We have our eye on you. We're going to keep our eye on you when you're in college for the next 3 years.
Exactly. And, building that relationship, like you said, is a key thing. So, like, say he performs well in his 3 years at Florida State or wherever he goes, you're able to go, all right, 3 years from now, Miles Bailey, when you're a junior, if you're doing well, remember us. Like,
Yeah.
we liked you out of high school. We still like you now. Come play for us. And it's just about developing that relationship, because I assume that Shirley's probably going to still be the scouting director when he's draft eligible next. But it's an upside swing that you're not going to get, obviously, but you're just developing a relationship with a guy that they like, and that's perfectly fine by me, because we've seen a lot of the better developing teams like the Brewers. They just take a crap ton of prep guys on day 3 and only sign like 2 of them. But it's about developing the relationships with them, and it's perfectly fine by me.
Yeah, so it is an insurance pick. He's not going to sign ultimately. It's a bummer because that would have been an awesome prospect to get in the system. The dude is like, that's one of the type of high school hitters that you can look at and be like, in terms of upside, like he would have been the 3rd, 4th highest upside player in this entire draft class, which is kind of crazy. In the 20th round, right? That people, the draft is complicated. People, like, this is the MLB draft compared to like every other draft is super complex. There's a lot of nuances to it. It takes a lot of intricate planning. So shout out to Mike Shirley and the entire White Sox organization, honestly, because I know that people want results and they want this team to succeed more, but like, this is not an easy task. Like, this is a hard thing to manage. And overall, I feel pretty good about it. I think there is some ups, there's some downs, there was some weirdness in day 2, but in general, it was a creative draft. It was a draft that leans into the philosophy, and it was a draft that leans into what the organization is good at right now. And that's something that I think at some point you should lean into what you're good at. And I think that's something the White Sox haven't done for a while. And they've constantly tried to just be good at kind of everything and a little bit of this and a little bit of that and whatever it is. And like, this organization right now is doing a really good job developing young pitchers. Like, that is the reality of the situation and the farm system and the organization from top to bottom. They're doing a really good job developing young pitchers. If that's what you're good at, sure, just go with it. Get guys that are more advanced college hitters that have more experience and a little bit more kind of a floor to build off of, and then get pitchers that you really see something in and see that ability to improve. So I like leaning into the philosophy. I like leaning into everything they're doing right now. With that said, like, let's get some hitters at the deadline. Yeah.
I think that Brian Bannister sort of said, like, oh, I don't really have that much of an impact on the draft process. But then you look at the draft, every single one of these guys has Brian Bannister's fingerprints all over them. Like, but all of the pitchers drafted, Brian Bannister is going to have fun working with. Like, there's especially guys like high octane relievers like Shepardson, George, Fox, even guys like Combs and Moore, where there's stuff to dream on there. And that's perfectly fine by me if you're able to get those high upside bats at the deadline with a Crochet trade, a Robert trade, a Fetty trade. That's it's fine by me, and I've sort of been like an advocate of like looking at the draft and the deadline in totality. Like, say we don't get a bunch of high upside guys in the draft. We did get some high upside guys, but there wasn't like the 18, 17 year old with George Walkout type
Right.
upside. But then if you're able to get that in a trade, it's they're still entering the organization either way. It doesn't matter how they
100%.
got here. It's just sort of like the farm system is going to look incredibly different in the
Yeah.
next 14 days, and it's already looking different from 5 days ago right now.
Yeah. And 20 new players are going to join the system, right? And in addition to 10 plus prospects that are going to come over the deadline if things go the way that I kind of hope they're going to go at this point, right?
Mhm.
Before we dive, I want to get your brief thoughts on the deadline. But before we do that, how many of these draft picks are going to slot into your top 30? Future Sox, for people that listen to us and follow us, we're going to be waiting till after the deadline to release our midseason or our, I guess, second half of the season top 30 for the White Sox because we want to see all the prospects that come over via the trade deadline. So that'll be coming out in August at some point. But for you right now, Dylan, when you look at this draft class, how many of these guys slot into your top 30 and kind of a rough estimate of around where they're at?
I think that there's three locks, in my
Yeah.
opinion. It's the top three picks. It's Hagen Smith, Caleb Bonemer, and Blake Larson. I think those
Yep.
three, they're probably top 20 on most lists. I think all three are going to be top 20 on mine. Hagen, I think I'm going to have a real struggle placing him, like because he could be as high as 2. He could be above Colson Montgomery. He could be as low as uh, as 4 because now that Thorpe graduated, like I think that I'm probably going to have him 3. I'm probably going to have
Yeah.
him below Schultz and Montgomery, but I think that
Same as me.
I think he's still probably going to be a top 30 prospect overall, and or in all of baseball. And I think Bonemer is probably he's tough to rank because there's not really a sort of like archetype to go off of for him because
Yeah.
you look at a lot of the guys in the system, they're pretty similar. Like Jake Ader, Kai Bush, they're essentially one and the same, but there's not really like a sort of like standard to look at for Bonemer. Like because
Is it
Walkout,
walkout, right?
I don't know. I don't know if I would say Walkout because I
Yeah.
think Walkout has higher upside than Bonemer, but Bonemer plays a more premium position. So it's just sort of it's 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 in the air right now, but I'd say I'd probably have him in the 9 to 12 range. I think I'll probably it'll be tough, but I think
Yeah.
that's probably the range I'll have him. And then Larson, I think, is pretty similar to a Christian Opper type guy from last year. I think that those two are, I don't want to say the same, but it's a high upside lefty starting pitcher with electric stuff and just needs to hone in on command more. I do like Larson more than Opper, I'll say that.
Yeah,
So I
agreed.
think he'll probably be in the 18 to 20 range with Opper slightly
Yeah.
blown. But I think that all three of those guys would probably be top 10 prospects if this was a year ago.
Yeah, 100%. That's a guarantee. I can tell you that. I agree with
Yeah.
you generally on most of those. I think for me, Hagen's pretty clearly going to be in the 3. I think Thorpe will be graduated after one more start. So I think Hagen pretty clearly is my 3. Bonemer is going to be in that 10 range, give or take a few picks. Larson, I actually think I might even have right on the edge of my top 15, honestly. I think he's better than an Opper. I think I have him right around the similar tier as like an Aldrin Batista, maybe even ahead of Batista in terms of just pure upside, but kind of similar tier as a Batista for me with Larson. And then I think Nick McLean will also slide into like the back of my top 30 potentially. I'm not 100% sure yet. I still got to really dive into some numbers for the back half of the top 30, but I think Nick McLean's a guy that could slot into that back part of my top 30 because I do believe there's a lot more to tap into with a guy like McLean. And then last thing, we're going to wrap here. We keep talking. I hope everyone is enjoying this. This is we really went in depth here, and we hope it's useful to kind of just hear our full takes and all of the analysis on all of these draft picks because they're going to be in the organization for a while, and they're guys that we're going to want to watch, and we're going to be carefully following their careers. And hopefully, I'm going to be interviewing a lot of these guys in the coming weeks. There should be plenty of interviews out with a lot of these draft picks. But last thing before we go, and I don't know the next time we'll talk to you, Dylan. We'll get you back on soon, but give me like Crochet, Robert, Fetty, traded or not traded, and if they're traded, what team are they traded to?
I think like my gut tells me that all three are traded
Wow,
because
really? I still don't
yeah,
think they pull the trigger on Robert. I don't know. Something just
I
tells me they
just
don't. They're too scared, but we'll see.
there wouldn't be smoke this far out from the deadline if there wasn't going to be something that materialized. I think that with enough teams that are in on him, I think that somebody is gonna offer whatever Getz is asking for, and I don't know if it's going to be the Phillies or the Mariners. I think it's going to be one of those teams. I think that if I had to guess right now, I'd say the Mariners for Robert. I don't know if Mike Elias
Actually,
is
it's so
going to
tough.
is
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if Mike Elias is going to give up a Kobe Mayo type or a Heston Kjerstad.
Sio,
Yeah,
man. That's
it's
all it
so
takes.
weird with him because he preached the whole develop the bats, trade them for pitching, but then is not trading them for pitching at all. So
Yep.
it's very weird. I could see, as crazy as it sounds, I could really see the Dodgers trading for him. I
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
yeah, it would make their rotation for the next 3 years like one of the greatest we've ever seen. Like Yamamoto, Otani, Glasnow, Crochet,
Just
and
stupid. Just
yeah,
stupid stuff.
just absurd. And somehow all of them are going to get hurt, and they'll have like 43-year-old Rich Hill pitch for them. Um, but Fetty, I think, is a more realistic candidate for the Orioles.
Yeah.
I think he's more in their price range, and he's probably not going to cost one of their blue chip prospects. I think that a Dylan Beavers is a type that I could really get behind.
Norby too.
Uh,
I would like Norby a
yeah,
lot. Yeah.
yeah, I think a Beavers and Norby package is sort of what we've all like come to terms with and be like, all right, I like it
Yeah.
because Beavers, I think in any other system, he's getting like heralded
A
as
lot
like the
more
future
attention.
center field. Yeah, like
Yeah, literally.
he's just buried in that Baltimore system, and he's
So
not
is
getting the
everyone.
respect. Yeah, he's not getting the respect he deserves. But
Yeah.
I think that like a Christian Yelich type player in Dylan Beavers is awesome to get for Fetty.
Yeah. I like those picks a lot. Jeff Cohen and I will have a full trade deadline analysis, breakdown, mock trades, everything next week on the Roundup. We hope you enjoyed this episode, this draft special episode. It was a lot of fun. I'm excited about this draft class. I know Dylan's excited about this draft class. Thanks for joining me, Dylan. And this is, I'll find Dylan at NotCease on Twitter. I am at Elijah EV8. We are covering the draft. We're going to be covering the deadline at FutureSox, where we're really breaking down everything you need in terms of the White Sox farm system. So great talking to you, Dylan, and we'll get you back on sometime soon.
It was awesome. Thank you so much.